The neophyte's first ordeal. There is in existence an idea that one should always call to mind when overly subjugated by the illusions of reality in the unreal, visible world, in which everything has a beginning and an end. This is the idea of infinity, the fact of infinity. In his book, The New Era of Thought, in the chapter, Space, the Scientific Basis of Altruism and Religion, C.H. Hinton writes, "When we come upon infinity in any mode of thought, it is a sign that the mode of thought is dealing with a higher reality than the one for which it is adapted, and in struggling to represent it, can only do so by an infinite number of terms of realities of a higher order. Truly then, what is infinity, as the ordinary mind represents it to itself? Infinity is the only reality, but at the same time it is also the abyss, the bottomless pit into which our mind falls after having risen to a height where it can no longer keep a foothold. So let us imagine for a moment that one begins to feel infinity in everything. Every thought, every idea leads us to the realization of infinity. This will inevitably happen to someone approaching an understanding of a higher order of reality. What then would we feel under such circumstances? We will sense a precipice, an abyss everywhere, no matter where we look. We'll experience an incredible horror, fear and even sadness until this fear and sadness transform themselves into the joy of sensing some new reality. An intolerable sadness is the very first experience of the neophyte in occultism, says Mabel C. Collins, the author of Light on the Path. We have previously examined the way in which a two-dimensional being might come to the understanding of the third dimension. But we have not asked ourselves what such a being would feel when it begins to sense the third dimension, beginning to be conscious of a new environment surrounding it. Let us imagine an animal in which flashes of human understanding begin to appear. The first sensation of this being would be that its old world, the world of two dimensions, the only world it represents to itself as real, is crumbling away and falling into ruins all around. Until such a being learns to perceive realities of another higher order, the sensation of the unreality of everything from its old world would be very strong indeed. This hypothetical being would pass from one negation to another. It would be forced to repudiate everything in its old two-dimensional world. Until such a being could learn to comprehend the reality of another higher order, until it could understand that behind the crumbling old world one infinitely more beautiful and new is opening up, a considerable period of time would need to elapse. During the time of this transition, the being in whom this new consciousness is in the process of unfolding, must pass from one abyss of despair to another, from one negation to another. It must repudiate everything around itself, because only by the repudiation of everything will the possibility of entering into a new life be realized. With the beginning of the gradual loss of the old world, the logic of the two-dimensional being, or that which stood for logic, will suffer continual violation, and its strongest impression will be that there is no logic at all, that no laws of any sort even exist. Formerly, when it was an animal, it reasoned thus: this is this house is mine. That is that house is strange, this is not that strange house is not mine. The strange house and its own house, the animal regards as different objects, having nothing in common at all. But now it will need to understand that the strange house and its own house are both simply houses. But how will it express this in its language of perceptions? Because strictly speaking it will be impossible to do this at all. It is impossible to express concepts in the language of an animal. The animal will simply mix up the sensations of the strange house and its own house. Confusedly, it will begin to feel some new properties in houses, and along with this it will feel less clearly those properties which previously made the strange house seem strange. Simultaneously, the animal will begin to sense new properties which it did not know before, and as a result will undoubtedly experience the necessity for a new logic, expressing the relation of the new order of things. To understand the new three-dimensional world, the animal would have to understand the new logicality of that world. The system of logic developed by Aristotle and Bacon, then elaborated upon and supplemented by their numerous followers, operating solely with concepts. However, having no concepts, the animal will not be in a position to construe the axioms of Aristotelian logic, and will express its impressions of the new order in the form of the entirely absurd but truer proposition, this is that. Or let us imagine that an animal with rudimentary logic expressing its sensations, this is this. That is that, this is not that. Somebody tries to prove that two different objects, two houses, its own and the strange one, are similar, that they represent one and the same thing, that they are both simply houses. The animal will never credit this similarity because for it, the two houses, its own where it sleeps, is fed and comforted, and the strange one, where it is beaten or chased away if it enters, will remain entirely different. There will be nothing in common in him for it, and the effort to prove the similarity of these two houses will lead to nothing, until it senses this itself. Then, sensing confusedly the idea of the likeness of two different objects, and being without concepts, the animal will express this as something illogical from its own point of view. The idea that this and that are similar objects, the two-dimensional being will translate into the language of its own logic, this is that, and of course will pronounce it an absurdity, affirming that the sensation of the new order of things leads to logical absurdities. It will be unable to express that which it senses in any other way. We are in exactly the same position when we dead awaken, i.e. when we as human beings come to the realization of that other life, and attempt to comprehend higher things. The same fright, the same loss of the real and same impression of never-ending logic, and the same formula, this is that, will affect us. In order to understand the new world we must understand the new logical order of things. Our usual logic assists us in the investigation of the relations in the phenomenal world only. Many attempts have been made to define what logic is, however logic is just as essentially indefinable as is mathematics. What is mathematics? The science of magnitudes. What is logic? The science of concepts. But these are not definitions, they are only the translation of the name. Mathematics, or the science of magnitudes, is that system which studies the quantitative relations between things. Logic, or the science of concepts, is that system which studies the qualitative, categorical relations between things. Logic has been built up quite in the same way as mathematics. So as with logic, then so too with mathematics, at least the generally known mathematics of finite and constant quantities, both were deduced by us from the observation of the phenomena of our world. Then by generalizing our observations, we gradually discovered those relations which we called the fundamental laws of the world. In logic, these fundamental laws are included in the axioms, A is A. That which was A, will be A. A is not negative A. That which was not negative A, will be not negative A. Everything is either A, or not negative A. Everything will be either A, or not negative A. The system of logic developed by Aristotle and Bacon, then elaborated upon and supplemented by their numerous followers, deals with concepts only. Logos, the word, is the subject of logic. To become the subject of logical reasoning, in order to become the object of logical reasoning, an idea must be expressed in a word. What cannot be expressed in a word cannot enter into a logical system, and furthermore a word can enter into a logical system or be subjected to logical laws, only as a concept. But at the same time we know that not everything can be expressed in words. In our life and in our feelings, there is much that cannot be expressed in concepts. Therefore, at the present moment, at the present stage of our development, not everything can be entirely logical to us. A great many things are essentially outside logic. Feelings, emotions and religion are outside of the domain of logic. All art is a complete illogicality. Mathematics, the most exact of sciences, is entirely illogical. If we compare the axioms of Aristotelian logic with the axioms of mathematics, we see that they are basically identical. The axioms of logic, A is A. A is not negative A. Each thing is either A or not negative A. Fully correspond with the fundamental axioms of mathematics, to the axioms of identity and difference. Every magnitude is equal to itself. The part is less than the whole. Two magnitudes, equal separately to a third, are equal to each other. The similarity between the axioms of these two disciplines allows us to draw the conclusion that they have the same origin. The laws of mathematics and of logic are the laws of the reflection of the phenomenal world in our receptivity, and in our reasoning faculty. Just as the axioms of logic can deal with concepts only, and are related solely to them, then so too the axioms of mathematics apply to finite and constant magnitudes only, and are related solely to them. These axioms are untrue in relation to infinity and variable magnitudes, just as the axioms of logic are untrue even in relation to emotions, to symbols, to music and to the hidden meaning of words, to say nothing of those ideas that cannot be expressed in words such as quality or worth. So what does this mean? It means that the axioms of logic and mathematics are deduced by us from the observation of phenomena, i.e. from the phenomenal world, and represent in themselves a certain conditional incorrectness, a corrective lens, which is necessary for the knowledge of the unreal subjective world, in the true meaning of that world. In fact, we have literally two mathematics. 1. The mathematics of finite and constant numbers represents an entirely artificial construction for the solution of problems based upon conditional data. The chief of these conditional data consists of the fact that in problems of this mathematics there is always taken the T of the universe only, i.e. one section only of the universe is taken, which section is never taken in conjunction with any other one. This mathematics of finite and constant magnitudes studies an artificial universe and is in itself something created on the basis of our observation of phenomena, serving to simplify these observations. Beyond phenomena, the mathematics of finite and constant numbers cannot go, because it is dealing with an imaginary world and imaginary magnitudes. The practical results of those applied sciences that are built upon mathematical science should not confuse the observer, because these are merely solutions to problems in specific artificial conditions. The other, the mathematics of infinite and variable magnitudes, is something entirely real and refers to the world of noumena, built upon the reasoning of a real world. The first is related to the world of phenomena, which represents in itself nothing other than our incorrect apprehension and perception of the world, seen through our corrective lenses. The second is related to the world of noumena, which represents in itself the world as it really is. The first is unreal, for it exists only in our consciousness, in our imagination. The second is real, because it expresses the relations of a real world. The mathematics of transfinite numbers, so called, may serve as an example of real mathematics, violating the fundamental axioms of our mathematics and logic. By transfinite numbers, as their name implies, is meant numbers beyond infinity. Infinity, as represented by its symbol, is the mathematical expression with which it is possible to perform all operations, divide, multiply and raise to powers. It is possible to raise infinity to the power of infinity. This magnitude is an infinite number of times greater than simple infinity. Yet at the same time they are equal. Infinity is equal to infinity to the power of infinity. This is the most remarkable property of transfinite numbers. You may perform with them any operation whatsoever and they will change in a corresponding manner, remaining at the same time equal. This violates the fundamental laws of mathematics accepted for finite numbers, because after a change, the finite number cannot be equal to itself. Yet here we see how after changing, the transfinite number remains equal to itself. Transfinite numbers are entirely real, and we can find examples corresponding to the expression infinity and even infinity to the power of infinity or infinity, multiplied by infinity to the power of infinity in our own world. Let us take a line, any segment of a line. We know that the number of points on this line is equal to infinity, for a point has no dimensions. If our segment is equal, say, to 1 inch, and beside it we imagine another segment a mile long, then in the smaller segment each point will correspond to a point in the larger one. The number of points in a segment 1 inch long is infinite. The number of points in a larger segment 1 mile long is also infinite, so we get infinity is equal to infinity. Let us now imagine a square, one side of which is a given segment, A. The number of lines in a square is infinite and the number of points in each line is infinite. Consequently, the number of points in a square is equal to infinity, multiplied by itself, an infinite number of times, infinity to the power of infinity. This magnitude is undoubtedly infinitely greater than the first one, infinity. Yet at the same time they're equal, because if there be an infinity, then it is one and cannot change. Upon the square, a, to the power of 2, let us now construct a cube. This cube consists of an infinite number of squares, just as a square consists of an infinite number of lines, and a line consists of an infinite number of points. Consequently, the number of points in the cube, a, to the third power is equal to infinity cubed, and this expression is equal also to the expression infinity squared and infinity. I.e., this means that an infinity continues to grow, whilst remaining at the same time unchanged. Thus in transfinite numbers we see that two magnitudes equal separately to a third can be not equal to each other. Generally speaking, we see that the fundamental axioms of our mathematics do not work there, and are not valid. We have therefore the right to establish the law that the fundamental axioms of mathematics enumerated herein are not applicable to transfinite numbers, but are applicable and valid only for finite numbers. We may also state that the fundamental axioms of our mathematics are valid for constant magnitudes only, or in other words that they demand unity of time and unity of place. That is, each magnitude is equal to itself at a given moment. But if we take a magnitude which varies, and then take it in different moments, then it will not be equal to itself. Of course we may say that in changing, it becomes another magnitude and that it is a given magnitude only for so long as it does not change. But that is precisely the point. The axioms of our usual mathematics are applicable to finite and constant magnitudes only. Thus, quite in opposition to the usual view, we must admit that the mathematics of finite and constant magnitudes is unreal, i.e., that it deals with the unreal relations of unreal magnitudes, while the mathematics of infinite and fluent magnitudes is real, i.e., that it deals with the real relations of real magnitudes. Truly, the greatest magnitude of the first mathematics has no dimension whatsoever. It is equal to 0, or to a point, in comparison with any other magnitude of the second mathematics, all magnitudes of which despite their diversity are equal among themselves. Thus here, as well as in logic, the axioms of the new mathematics appear as absurdities. A magnitude cannot be equal to itself. A part can be equal to the whole, or it can be greater than the whole. One of two equal magnitudes can be infinitely greater than another. All different magnitudes are equal among themselves. We observe a complete analogy between the axioms of mathematics and those of logic. The logical unit, the concept, possesses all the properties of a finite and constant magnitude. The fundamental axioms of logic and mathematics are correct only so long as logic and mathematics operate with artificial conditional units that do not exist in nature. The truth is that there are no finite, constant magnitudes in nature, just as there are no concepts. The finite, constant magnitude and the concept are artificial abstractions, and not reality at all, but merely the sections of reality that we perceive. The idea of constancy or variability is the outcome of the incapacity of our limited mind to know a thing as it actually is. How shall we reconcile the idea of the absence of constant magnitudes with the idea of an immobile universe, because at first sight one appears to contradict the other? In reality, however, this contradiction does not exist. Not this universe is immobile, but the greater universe, the world of many dimensions, of which we know only the perpetually moving section called the three-dimensional infinite sphere. Furthermore, the very concepts of motion and immobility need revision, because as we usually understand them, with the aid of our reasoning, they do not correspond to reality. We have already analyzed how the idea of motion follows from our time sense, i.e., from the imperfection of our space sense. Were our space sense more perfect in relation to any given object, say the body of a human being, then we could embrace all of their life in time, from birth to death. Then within the limits of this embrace, that life would be for us a constant magnitude. But now, at every given moment of it, it is for us not a constant, but a variable magnitude. That which we call a body does not exist in reality. It is only the section of that four-dimensional body that we never see. We ought always to remember that our three-dimensional world does not exist in reality. It is a creation of our imperfect senses and the result of their imperfection. This is not the world, but merely that which we see of the world. The three-dimensional world is the four-dimensional world observed through the narrow slit of our senses. Therefore all magnitudes which we regard as such in the three-dimensional world are not real magnitudes, but merely artificially assumed. They do not exist really, in just the same way as the present does not exist. By the present we designate that moment of transition from the future into the past, but this transition has no extension. How long is it? How long does it last? Therefore the present does not exist, and only the future and the past exist. Constant magnitudes in the three-dimensional world are only abstractions, just as motion in the three-dimensional world is in substance simply an abstraction. In the three-dimensional world there is no change, no motion. In order to think motion, we already need the four-dimensional world. The three-dimensional world does not exist in reality, or at best it exists only during one ideal moment. In the next ideal moment there already exists another three-dimensional world. Therefore the magnitude, A, in the following moment is already not A, but B, and in the next C, and so on to infinity. It is equal to itself in one ideal moment only. In other words, within the limit of each ideal moment the axioms of mathematics are true. But for the comparison of two ideal moments they are merely conditional, just as the logic of Bacon is conditional in comparison with the logic of Aristotle. In time, i.e. in relation to variable magnitudes, from the standpoint of the ideal moment they are untrue. The idea of constancy and variability emanates from the impotence of our limited reason to comprehend a thing other than by its section. If we could comprehend a thing in four dimensions, let us say a human body from birth to death, then it would be the whole and constant body, the section of which we call a changing in time human form. A moment in life, i.e. a body as we know it in the three-dimensional world, is a point on an infinite timeline. If we were able to comprehend this body as a whole, then we would know it as an absolutely constant magnitude, with its many manifestations of form, states and positions. But then to this constant magnitude the axioms of our mathematics and logic would be inapplicable, because it would be an infinite magnitude. We cannot comprehend this infinite magnitude and comprehend always its sections only because our mathematics and logic are related to this imaginary section of the universe.